It is not death in the battlefield that matters, but the dignity with which one faces it. There are moments in history when even time seems to pause and catch its breath. One such day dawned on the banks of the river Hydaspes. On one side stood a man who had marched out of Greece and trampled Persia, Egypt, and Central Asia beneath his feet. On the other stood a king who demanded nothing except his land, his civilization, and his dignity. This was not merely a clash of two armies, it was a collision between the greatest military power of its age and one of the world's most ancient civilizations. On one side was Alexander the Great, a conqueror for whom the throne was not an end, but a beginning, a man whose dreams kept compressing the map of the world, about whom it was said, wherever he stopped, history itself came to an end. And on the other side stood King Porus, not merely a regional ruler but an idea, a king who understood that defeat was possible, but submission was not. As the monsoon swollen river raged between them, the question was no longer who would win. The real question was who would stand with dignity. This is the story of the moment when Alexander for the first time found himself restrained, and when India for the first time told the world that power does not reside in the sword alone. Sometimes it lives in refusal. How are you, my friends? It is the month of May 326 BCE. The greatest conqueror the world has ever known, Alexander the Great, who has already crushed the mighty Persian Empire, conquered Egypt, and planted the flags of his victories across Central Asia, has now set foot on the ancient land of India. Alexander had only one purpose, one dream, to unite the entire world into a single empire. But no, that dream was about to be challenged, for standing before him was a rival who was not only brave but ready to cross every limit for the freedom of his homeland. A man for whom obedience to Alexander was worse than death. A warrior who knew how to look Alexander straight in the eyes and fight with him with courage and honor. The world knows this great king as Raja Porus, King Porus. Alexander's campaign in the Indian subcontinent had begun in 327 BCE. Crossing the snow-covered peaks of the Hindu Kush, he descended into the valleys of Kabul and Swat. The local tribes resisted fiercely, but Alexander's formidable army crushed all opposition. This army included the famous Macedonian phalanx, a well-like formation of infantry armed with long spears, the elite companion cavalry, Alexander's personal mounted guards, and highly mobile light archers. After crossing the Indus River, Alexander arrived at Taxila, a city that at the time held immense importance as one of the world's greatest centers of learning and trade. If you want to learn more about Taxland, what is often described as the world's first university, you can watch detailed video available on our channel. Friends, the ruler of Taxila, King Ambi, also known as Taxiles, was deeply wary of the power of Alexander's rival, King Porus. Determined to protect his own kingdom from Porus, Ambi was willing to go to any length. When he learned of Alexander's advance, Ambi realized that Alexander could serve as a shield against Porus. As the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so King Ambi chose exactly that path. He accepted Alexander's authority and entered into an alliance with him. As a result, Ambi provided Alexander with troops, supplies, and most crucially, valuable intelligence about the region. No, Alexander's gaze was fixed across the Hydaspes river, modern-day river Jhelum, toward the kingdom of Porus. Porus ruled the fertile land between Jhelum and the Chenab river, a prosperous and wealthy region that the Greeks referred to as the Golden Land. The ancient Greek historian Arrian writes of King Porus as a tall, striking, and exceptionally courageous ruler. He said to have stood nearly 7 feet tall, and in battle he fought mounted atop his largest war elephant. He is said to have stood nearly 7 feet tall, and in battle he fought mounted atop his largest war elephant. Porus's army was formidable, almost terrifying in its scale, between 20 to 50,000 infantry, 2 to 4,000 cavalry, around 300 war chariots, and most dangerously of all, an entirely new weapon for the Greeks, war elephants, estimated to number between 85 to 200. These elephants were armored. They carried howdahs, wooden towers mounted on their backs, from which archers and spearmen rained death upon the enemy. Their thunderous roars sent horses into panic, and under their massive feet, entire formations were crushed into the earth. Friends, Alexander's army was no small force either. It numbered between 40 to 50,000 troops, divided into multiple specialized units, but this was an army that had been on campaign for years, worn down by constant warfare and exhausted by the long, unforgiving march into Inter Porus' kingdom. Alexander had no choice but to cross a natural barrier, the river Hydaspes. But fate made the challenge even harsher and harder. The monsoon had already begun. Relentless rains had swollen the river Jhelum beyond its banks. The current was fierce, the waters violent, and the river banks thick with slippery mud. Meanwhile, Porus had taken up a defensive position on the opposite bank. He placed his gigantic war elephants along the front line, standing like a living wall. Behind them stood the infantry with cavalry and war chariots positioned on both flanks. A military strategist of Alexander's caliber knew one thing clearly: a direct river crossing under these conditions would be suicide, and the elephants would send his horses into chaos. So Alexander turned to what he masters best: deception. According to Plutarch and Arrian, for several days Alexander kept his army constantly on the move along the river bank. He created noise, staged mock preparations, and gave the impression that an attack could come at any moment. Alexander set his chosen force into motion. According to Arrian, this detachment consisted of approximately 5 to 6,000 cavalry, including the elite companion cavalry, and 10,000 to 15,000 infantry. Keeping close to the cover of the riverside forest, Alexander marched about 27 kilometers upstream to a point where the river bent a natural curve that slightly weakened the force of the current. There, using boats, leather inflatable rafts, and bundles of straw which floated on the water, his army began the perilous crossing. When Porus received this news from his scouts, he was stunned. He immediately dispatched his son, leading 2,000 cavalry and a contingent of war chariots, to confront the crossing force. But Alexander's elite companion cavalry intercepted them halfway. A fierce engagement followed. Porus' son was killed and his force was annihilated. No, Porus understood the real threat had emerged from behind. He decided to bring out his entire army and face Alexander in open battle. The battlefield was vast but rain-soaked and treacherous with mud. Porus adopted a classic defensive formation. He positioned his war elephants along the front lines, spaced roughly 100 feet apart, ensuring that no cavalry could break through. Infantry filled the gaps between the elephants. Cavalry was placed on both flanks, and the chariots were deployed at the very front. The stage was set, and the battle that would echo through history was about to begin. Alexander now arranged his forces for battle. He personally took command of the right flank, leading the elite companion cavalry. On the left flank stood General Coinus with his cavalry, while phalanx held the center. As the battle began, Alexander struck first with his horse archer. They rode forward and showered arrows upon Porus' left flank, cavalry steadily weakening it. Porus responded by sending in his right flank cavalry. But Alexander was already thinking several moves ahead. He ordered Coinus to swing around from the rear and close the trap. This was Alexander's famous hammer and anvil tactic. Pressure from the front, encirclement from behind. Porus' cavalry was soon shattered. The war chariots fared no better. They skidded helplessly in the mud, overturned, horses collapsed, and drivers were killed beneath the chaos. Now came the moment of the war elephant. Porus gave the command, and the elephant surged forward. The Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus described what followed in terrifying detail. The elephants crashed into the Macedonian phalanx. With their trunks they lifted soldiers and hurled them aside, crushed men beneath their feet, and impaled bodies against spears. The phalanx's long sarissas, 18-foot pikes, could not penetrate the elephants' thick hides. Horses panicked at the elephant's roar and scent. Even Alexander's beloved horse, Bucephalus, was wounded, a wound from which he would later die. But Alexander had anticipated this moment. He ordered his light infantry, the Agrianians, Thracians, and specialized javelin throwers to slip through the gaps between the elephants and attack. They targeted the elephants' eyes, trunks, legs, and most critically, the mahouts, the men who controlled them. Steel met flesh, control turned into chaos, and the most terrifying weapon on the battlefield was about to become a danger to its own. The historian Diodorus Siculus writes that the elephants, driven mad by pain, lost all control, wounded and panicked. They turned back upon their own infantry, trampling them beneath their massive feet. Porus' formation collapsed, panic spread, and his army began to flee. At that moment, Craterus crossed the river from the main camp with fresh troops joining the battle. Now Porus' forces were encircled from all sides, yet Porus himself continued to fight. Mounted on his great elephant, he was wounded by arrows and spears, blood streaming from his body. His sons and commanders were dead. But still he stood his ground. At last, when resistance became impossible, Porus laid his arms. Alexander was struck by Porus' towering presence and extraordinary courage. According to Plutarch's famous account, Alexander asked him, "How would you wish to be treated?" Porus lifted his head and replied with fearless dignity, "As one king treats another king." In that moment, Alexander understood the true measure of the man before him, a ruler who, though defeated outwardly, remained victoriously within. Alexander not only spared Porus' life, but restored his kingdom, granted him additional territory, and appointed him a satrap, a governor, and trusted ally. Friends, when we speak of losses in the battle, according to Arrian, Alexander suffered only 310 fatalities, but modern historians such as Nickfield estimate the number to be over 1,000, including the death of Bucephalus. On Porus' side, between 12,000 and 30,000 soldiers were killed, thousands were captured, and more than 80 war elephants were killed or taken. To commemorate his victory, Alexander founded the city of Nicaea, and in memory of his beloved horse, he established Bucephala. This was not just a battle, it was a moment where conquest met character and where dignity proved stronger than defeat. The most thought provoking fact is this: the Battle of the Hydaspes was Alexander's last great battle. The courage of Porus combined with the sheer strength, resilience, and martial skills of the people of the Indian subcontinent forces Alexander to confront a hard truth. India would not be easily absorbed into his empire. After Hydaspes, Alexander attempted to push further east, but at the river Hypasis, modern-day Beas River, his exhausted army rebelled. They refused to march any further. For the first time, the unstoppable conqueror had no choice but to turn back. On his return journey in 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylonian, leaving behind a world empire and an unfinished dream. The Battle of the Hydaspes did more than reshape military history. It brought Greek and Indian cultures into contact, giving rise to Greco-Buddhist art, a fusion that endured for centuries. Modern historians agree on one point: Porus was Alexander's most formidable opponent. This was no easy victory, it was a battle that nearly brought Alexander's conquest to a halt. And this is not merely a story of victory or defeat, it is a story of bravery, strategy, and unyielding courage. Porus did lose the battle, but he lost in a way that made even victory feel humbled. History will always remember King Porus as a great warrior and as a king whose dignity outlived defeat.